All right, well, good evening, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. We may have some folks joining us, but my name is Beth. I'm the adult programming librarian here for the Mid-Continent Public Library. So I plan both our in-branch programs and our virtual branch programs like these. We want to welcome you to this evening's program, Native Plants for Pollinators. We did have to reschedule this from last month, but we are recording tonight's program. So if you know somebody who was unable to make the rescheduled date, or if you want to watch things again, we will email out the link once the video is available. Because we are recording, we are going to ask folks to remain muted during the program and type your questions in the chat so we can get a good quality recording for everybody. We'll save time at the end for questions, and I'll keep track of them in the chat. I've also dropped the link to tonight's survey in the chat, and I will email that out to everyone at the end of the program, along with some links that Jada has in her presentation about places that you can get plants. So we hope you'll take a moment to fill that out and let us know how we did. If you have suggestions for other topics that you'd like to see for programs, I always like to hear those as well, because we do want to offer programs that folks are interested in. And I did want to mention a couple of upcoming programs as well. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. So the first program I wanted to mention is high blood pressure, the silent killer. This was a program that we have our friends from the North Kansas City Hospital that will be coming on September 17th at 6:30, talking about high blood pressure, the signs, and also what you can do if you have high blood pressure to help reduce it. The next program I want to mention is Frida Kahlo, Dreams, Demons, and Devotion. This is on September 18th at 6:30 on Zoom, part of our Hispanic Heritage Month celebration. We're going to look at Frida Kahlo's paintings with art historian Janet Mandel, and look at her works through the lens of her ethnicity, disabilities, and political activism. On September 19th at 6:30, we have a retired docent from the Smithsonian, Dr. Thierfelder, who will be sharing a program on Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. We probably know him best for his Sherlock Holmes series, but he also had works of fantasy, science fiction, plays, nonfiction, historical novels, and he will be talking about his works beyond Sherlock Holmes. And then we continue our celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month on September 25th at 6:30 with film critic Frank Mendoza, who will be talking about Rita Moreno. She's a 90 and still going strong. You might know her work in West Side Story or in her early years on the Electric Company, but she's got the Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, Tony, the EGOT. So that should be a really fun program as well. And then the folks from the Missouri Department of Conservation will be back with us on September 26th at 6:30 for Monarch Mania. And they'll be talking about the migration and life cycle of the monarch butterfly, as well as conservation efforts related to the monarch and ways that you can help in those efforts. So these are all programs that will be on Zoom. You do need to register to receive that Zoom link. And I am going to stop sharing my screen here so that I can turn it over to our presenter this evening. Jada Tressler is with the Missouri Department of Conservation, and I will let her introduce herself and get started with this evening's program.
Okay, thank you, Beth. I'm very excited to be here tonight. My name is Jada Tressler. I am a naturalist for the Missouri Department of Conservation. I work at Burr Oak Woods Nature Center, and I have been at that location for going on 2 years now. But I've been doing what we call interpretation for the last almost 9.5, 10 years. Interpretation is taking in your surroundings, whether that is an open prairie, a forest, different habitats, different factors within a habitat, and observing it in a way that I can then present it to somebody else in a way that they understand and make a connection with it. The art form of interpretation, we at first might think of it as translating from one language to another, but while I don't do any sort of like second language and translation, I do take the language that is reading the natural world, understanding what's around us, and I bring it to people who are interested in their surroundings in a way that they can understand. What we found through interpretation is the more that people understand about what's around them, the more they care about it, and people protect what they care. And all of you have some interest in native plants tonight, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about. I have been fortunate enough to work in the education branch of the Department of Conservation. And within our branch, it's a collaboration effort to really try to present as much information as we can in a way that anybody who has a wide-ranging interest in plants to very, very beginner mindset, we're here to help you take the next step in what it is you want to learn and what you want to care about. So the program I'm going to present today is going to be a bit of a collaboration, like I said, with other groups of naturalists within the Department of Conservation. And okay. Hopefully that is able for everybody to see. And I'm going to be bringing this presentation as some information that I've collaborated on, with my coworkers on at my site, as well as at the Anita B. Gorman Discovery Center. So a lot of the information that we're going to see today is going to come from a couple different sources and a couple different presenters. So you may see a few different styles in this presentation. And that's because whenever I talk about native plants, I always like to talk about the plants. You can write down what you observe, you can read the textbooks, you can study them your whole life, and a plant that I plant in my garden is going to do something different potentially than what it does in another garden or another natural ecosystem. Plants are going to do what they want to do. And so, I always preface that with the best thing we can do with our native plants is put them in the ground and see what happens. Use your power of observation. Get in there and don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. As you can see down here in this picture, this is me at the entrance of the Burr Oak Woods Nature Center, and I am almost hip deep in our little pond that we have, and inside the pond we have all of these pots where we keep our potted plants, either submerged, completely underwater, or allowing them to emerge just above the water level so that way we can see. Native plants are what we consider low maintenance plants, not no maintenance. So you do have to have some level of involvement, but the cool thing is the level of involvement is much more manageable than it would be for a traditional turf lawn setting, or even more of our manicured, very professional looking natural landscape efforts that you might see in home, neighborhoods, or in professional settings. So with that, habitat for native animals starts with native plants. And I think this is always important to start out with because it's very easy for us as humans to relate to something soft and cuddly like a baby deer. It is less easy for us to relate to something like this, which is a damselfly, a relative of the dragonfly. Both of these creatures are native to Missouri. We can find them virtually anywhere in the state. They are highly adaptable to different ecosystems within the state, and they are able to find resources that they need. And because they have native plants on their side to support them, they can complete their entirety of their life cycle in the state of Missouri, and it's largely due to native plants. So natural landscaping is going to bring native animals into the area where the plants are growing. Sometimes this does cause human conflicts, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad thing that you've brought things from the wild, per se, into your residential, suburban, urban area. There are ways to mitigate any of the conflicts that you might have. And again, this damselfly down here has just of an important ecosystem role as our soft, cute, cuddly mammals do. It's just a lot harder to relate to these invertebrates. So it's important to learn about them so that way we can understand more of what we can do to support them. Once established, native plants are very easy to take care of. So if you stop and think about if you are a homeowner, if you have any sort of yard to maintain, the majority of that yard, if it is turf grass, think about how many hours that you spend mowing that grass in one session. And then multiply that by how many times you have to mow during the growing season. With native plants, there's still going to be a level of maintenance that comes from keeping this garden looking the way that you want it to, but you will have a more productive means of maintaining your garden rather than just constantly cutting down your lawn only for it to regrow and have to cut it down again within the next week. There are things that you can do within your native landscaping that really help sustain not only beautiful curb appeal, but also bring in different species of invertebrates, such as this beautiful butterfly right here. And then the big thing that everybody is always concerned about is native plants in the long run do save you money. If you are not considering how much it costs to maintain all of your lawn care equipment, such as your mower, your weed eaters, your sidewalk trimmers, that sort of thing. You may also have to factor in irrigation costs. How much are you spending to water your lawn? Any fertilizer that you are putting in, whether it is organic compounds or chemical compounds. If you're wanting natural native plants to be included in your native landscape, you definitely don't want to overdo it on the pesticides. So that's saving you money right there. So all of these things are going to add up to major savings for you. And the work that you are putting into these native gardens are going to be much more of a meaningful impact versus spending time just pushing your push mower around and cutting down that grass every couple of days to make sure that you stay within the ideal standards of a healthy lawn. And then with this, your eyes just naturally gravitate towards how these plants display themselves all throughout their growing cycle. So whenever I think about native plants, I like to think of just this explosion of colors, shapes, textures, and sizes of different native species. There's a plant for every place, and I'm probably going to say that a couple times throughout this presentation. But depending on where you live, what kind of soil, sun situation, moisture types in your soil, you're going to be able to plant a variety of different native plants within your yard. And you can definitely stick with some plants that are within the same color scheme. Right here, we all have some purple shades. But if you look back here on this bottom left photo of the pale purple coneflower in the very back, you see some pops of yellow, which are a very complementary color to our purples. These plants, they all work together to support natural ecosystems, even within a small yard. But again, that even if you don't consider that aspect of natural landscaping, you also have the added benefit of just the beautiful aesthetic that these plants have to offer. Um, there was a time in history where it was established that to have the ideal yard was to have a grass that was cut low, it was maintained to a certain standard, and it's always important to think going forward, how can we change that to where if we are wanting something different for our yard, how is it going to benefit us as well as the native wildlife that we have in our state? So when I use the word native, specifically, I'm speaking of plants that are in Missouri as their original home. So these are plants that have adapted to the climate of the region where they originated. And while these plants have been growing throughout history, there are other parts of the ecosystem that are adapting and evolving alongside them. So a community of these plants is going to provide that habitat, which is in the very general sense of the word, it is a home for a variety of native wildlife species that, again, are also adapted to the climate and the plant life where they originated. So all of these different organisms, all of these different living species, they all work together, whether it's a plant or an animal, whether it is a creepy crawly insect or a soft fuzzy bunny rabbit. All of these plants and animals are working together because this is where they originated. This is where they started, and this is where they belong. They can exist in other areas. They just aren't going to do as well, and they're not going to provide everything that they could to the fullest potential of their purpose as a part of the ecosystem if they were to go to a different area. So that's why keeping our native plants in Missouri and really focusing on planting native is super helpful for our wildlife and our ecosystems from the plant level as well. Now, for some of us, we might use the word weed as kind of a bad word, something that has a negative connotation. And I really like this quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson from 1878, where he states, "What is a weed? A plant whose virtues have not yet been discovered." So essentially, a weed is really hard to define because it really is it is really dependent on who you're speaking to. For some folks, milkweed might actually be a weed, but for those of us who understand the relationship that milkweed has with our monarch butterfly caterpillars, we understand that milkweed planted with the purpose of supporting monarchs could never be a weed, even though it does tend to have weedish tendencies where it may be aggressive, take over an area, and may not look as picture perfect or like a manicured option for a landscape. There are some things that we call cultivars where humans have selectively bred different plants to do certain things. Maybe it's to grow a certain height or not get as tall. It could be to change the different colors of the flowers. That's always a very prominent cultivar that you see. The pale purple coneflower that we saw in the past slide exists as a myriad of different colors. And a lot of them are cultivars where people have been able to breed plants with specific color genotypes. So that way we can get a variety of colors, which again is very appealing, especially for someone going for a very colorful garden. So whatever your definition of a weed is, just remember that what you consider to be a weed may not be what other people consider to be a weed. And it's always good to stop and think about what your perception of a weed is as far as, how are you going to treat this plant going forward? Exotic plant species, sometimes we call them invasive species. These plants are ones that have not originated within our ecosystem, and they can either be grassy plants like Johnson grass right here in the top middle. They can be a flowering plant, also called herbaceous, like garlic mustard in the bottom right, teasel in the bottom middle, and Sericea lespedeza. These plants are non-woody compared to bush honeysuckle in the top left corner here, and autumn olive, which is a woody shrub extending into a small tree. So exotic plant species typically spread very quickly because, as we talked about, where the plants that originate in a specific area have co-evolved alongside other living things, those two, that plant has been kept in balance by all the other native species around it. When you introduce an exotic species to an ecosystem, there isn't anything that has evolved alongside of it to control that exotic species. So, for instance, the bush honeysuckle plant. This plant was introduced to Missouri with good intentions. It grows very fast, which is very helpful for maintaining stream banks so that way we can mitigate erosion. However, for a plant that spreads very quickly, ideally you'd want to have a biological control in order to make sure that it doesn't choke out any of the other plants around it. And because this is an exotic plant species, it grows unchecked all across Missouri. And one of the best ways to identify it is coming up here pretty soon. You're going to start seeing clusters of these 4 red berries alongside a stem of leaves that are opposite of each other. So leaves that are exactly opposite on opposite sides of the stem on this branch. When you start to see these red berries, birds are going to come along. They're going to see those too, and they're going to eat those berries. And in their droppings, the seeds will be released, and the bush honeysuckle will spread up and see more of its plants being scattered across the landscape. And again, there isn't another biological control that can mitigate how many of those plants germinate. And so this plant does take over, and it does create a lot of devastation to our natural ecosystems. So in my opinion, this is what I would consider to be a weed, something that has detrimental effects on our ecosystem, grows out of control, is not supposed to be here. And you might think, well, this is all well and good, but why should we care? Maybe you like your lawn. Maybe you like a nice, clean, manicured look to your grass, and that's fine. But again, we're here with the intent of learning, so that way we can understand, and so that way we can care about what we learn about. And at the root of it is, when one thing gets out of balance in an ecosystem, it's compounded up through the ecosystem until all living things eventually are affected one way or another. So the 3 species that I have down here are species that face threats based on habitat loss, as well as the effects of having exotic species in an area. So very identifiable right here in the middle, we've got the barn owl. Barn owls rely on old tree snags, and then of course they will take up residence in barns. So if there's a forest that has been degraded to the point where, you know, it's a monoculture, it's just a lot of bush honeysuckle or autumn olive, a barn owl is going to have a harder time finding a place to live. Eastern hellbenders, which is this creature on the bottom right, these are one of Missouri's salamanders. This is the giant salamander that we have in the state. It gets the largest. It can reach lengths up over 1 foot. And they definitely can be affected by invasive aquatic plants that degrade their natural ecosystem. And then plants can also be endangered as well. So this plant right here is the Western Prairie Fringed Orchid, and it relies on a moth to come along and pollinate it. And this plant is already struggling to find habitat which it can thrive in. Prairie is a very rare resource throughout the state. We don't have a lot of prairie left behind, even though that's used to be a lot of our state. And without a lot of place for this plant to grow, there's also less space for the moth that pollinates this plant to also thrive. So it's a compounded factor as far as not having a place to live and not having your kind of ecosystem partner in that pollinator coming along to help you regenerate new growth for future generations. Native plants do provide shelter and food for wildlife. By having a variety of different native plants, you support a variety of different animals. So right here on this picture, we have some animals that we see. Some are endangered, some are not, some are at different levels of threat, but all can be improved with the addition of native plants and maintaining our native ecosystems. So that way we can provide a diverse habitat with lots of food sources. And then, you know, if you have a plot in a residential area, maybe you're like me and you have less than a quarter of an acre in which you can plant, you're probably not going to put a bunch of native plants in and then immediately see bobwhite quail or prairie chickens. But you are going to see amphibians who are attracted to your yard because there's a lot of insects that have come to your yard as pollinators to help themselves to the flowers that have bloomed in your yard. So all of that leads to a healthy ecosystem. It does play a role in what we can consider the health of Missouri's forest, fish, and wildlife, and also put a stop on this declining natural diversity that we see statewide. So there are instances where native plants can have a relationship where they both benefit. We call that a symbiotic relationship. And whenever we see that really get disrupted, it's usually because of pesticides. Now, there are lots of cases where you can debate the pros and cons of different herbicides and pesticides. And a lot of it in the against or the negative aspects of these chemical applications usually comes from misuse and not reading the label. So this is not a program to tell you yes or no, you should or shouldn't use these. This is more of an awareness that if you are going to use them, please read the label. So that way we can continue to have the symbiotic relationship where the plants are still benefiting with the insects rather than misusing a pesticide that hurts the insects and the plant whenever the insect is removed from the equation. Pesticides are applied to lawns every year, which can run off. And this is, again, going to go back to that money saving factor. We all want to see if we can save a little bit more money, be frugal with our finances. And the less pesticide and herbicide that you can put on your lawn, the more money you're going to save. And we're going to be able to maintain that symbiotic relationship that insects have with plants that they both need. So for instance, let's say you do have a yard where you can plant an oak tree, which, as a lot of us probably know, oaks can get incredibly large. They can produce a large quantity of fruit, which is their acorn. Or maybe you have a space that is suited for something more like a black cherry, which can get very tall, but has a much, much skinnier trunk. Both of these trees are going to be the foundation for several different insect species within our ecosystem. So healthy trees that are growing in Missouri, healthy native trees, will actually be just fine, even if it gets chewed up by one of these caterpillars, a native caterpillar. So this is the very first one starting on the left is the Luna moth. In the middle with those giant eye spots at the tiger swallowtail. And then we have the Polyphemus moth, which is one of my favorites. All of these are very large. They have voracious appetites. They will chew on tree leaves from the oaks or the black cherry. And they will eat their fill until they're ready to metamorphosize. Now, for the tree, if you plant a tree and you nurture it and you take care of it, and all of a sudden you see it chewed up by caterpillars, you might think, oh no, my tree, I need to do something about these caterpillars. Stop and remember that symbiotic relationship where both individuals are benefiting. The caterpillars are getting to eat. The tree is actually getting the cue from all of this herbivory that they need to generate more growth next year. So when they come back out of dormancy for the spring growing season, they're actually going to see a much more full tree with more foliage because of all of that chomping that those caterpillars did. It's actually going to benefit the tree to create more food for future generations. So don't worry if your trees get chewed up by native caterpillars. That's okay. That's what's supposed to happen. You have done your part. Caterpillars are considered nature's baby food for birds. Birds rely on hundreds, if not thousands, of insects to raise a brood of baby birds from day-old hatchlings all the way up to adults. So if you were to plant an oak tree, it's very possible that you could see over 500 different butterfly and moth species supported just from that oak. And there's lots of varieties of oak. It doesn't have to be a specific one. Right behind it is black cherry. If you have an area that has a lot of water nearby, you might want a willow or a birch or a poplar. If you are looking more for a traditional ornamental for a yard, crabapple, maple trees, those are still very popular and will provide food sources and habitats for several different butterflies and moths. And then down here, we also have elm. So think about that whenever you're considering if you need to plant a tree in your yard or if you need to replace one. These stats were from over a year ago, so it's possible that they have changed. Over half of the lower 48 states are cities and suburbs. And of that, 41% and 41% is agriculture. So about 95% of what was nature or what we consider nature is now man-made or unnatural. And that's where it really comes into play that a landowner has much more impact than we realize. Again, even if you're like me and you have less than a quarter acre, you can still support natural species by creating a little oasis of native plants in your yard. You can't do that necessarily if all you're planting are exotic species, because they support up to 20 times less biodiversity than native ornamentals. And this came from Dr. Doug Tallamy. Highly recommend his works. I will link a couple of them or at least one at the end of my presentation that I know Mid-Continent provides in their collection. But if you are interested in reading more about native plants and their relationship with insects and caterpillars, definitely check out Dr. Doug Tallamy. So again, that's why it's always really important to choose our native plants whenever possible, and to just leave the exotic ornamentals that we might see in large commercial stores, leave those. And hopefully that will let retailers know that we're more interested in native plants versus exotics. So for our pollinators, like a caterpillar that eventually metamorphosizes into a butterfly, these adults are really going to be looking for a host plant to lay their eggs on. So on this right-hand picture, we see the underside of a milkweed leaf. And this teeny tiny little dot is a caterpillar egg. And the caterpillar will hatch out of its egg. And the first thing it will eat is actually its eggshell, and then it will start eating this leaf. And I've seen monarch caterpillars actually eat an entire milkweed leaf and then start munching on the stem, because all parts of the plant are edible for a monarch caterpillar. And again, these insects are going to adapt to rely on specific plants. The monarch can only lay their eggs on milkweed, and they can only eat milkweed as a caterpillar. Now, as an adult, the butterfly monarch butterfly adult can go to different nectar sources. It can use any plant species that has nectar, but for the caterpillar, they must stay on the milkweed. So these are one of the most easily identifiable butterflies and caterpillars in North America. They are not the only ones that we have. And again, going back to talking about trees, the zebra swallowtail will rely on a tree called the pawpaw to lay its eggs on. So the adult zebra swallowtail will seek out a pawpaw tree. Pawpaws are typically an understory tree that grow low to the forest floor. The caterpillar egg will be laid on the leaf. The caterpillar will hatch, start munching on the leaves, and eventually metamorphosize into the adult. And then as the adult, they will visit the flower occasionally, but the flower actually relies on a different pollinator, not one that we would normally think about fondly, but it still provides a service for the pawpaw tree. See, this flower does not have your typical flower smell. It actually smells very terrible. Pawpaw trees use a very strong, very acrid smell, similar to that of rotting flesh. And the pawpaw relies on the pollination of flies to visit its flowers and then create the pawpaw fruit. Once the flower has been pollinated, the bloom dies back, and eventually the ovary will turn into the fruit that we know as the pawpaw, which can be enjoyed by wildlife and humans. So if you're out walking around, I know Burr Oak Woods has a trail called the Missouri Tree Trail. And when you get into it's not very far from the trailhead, you'll notice there's a grove of pawpaw trees. The fruits, if the raccoons haven't gotten to them, there should still be some there. And the fruits can be consumed for personal use. And the pawpaw, I've been told, tastes like a banana mixed with a mango. And it has the similar consistency of a banana. It's not my favorite. It's very sweet. But if you have a sweet tooth, I bet you would like it. So there's a little bit of a insect, native plant, and a human connection there with these different plants. Native plants also provide a connection to our natural heritage. Native plants are considered or are studied in an area called ethnobotany, where you really dive deep into the relationship of what did people use this plant for, what was the importance of it, and how do we regard it today. And of course, anytime that you can get students outside in a natural environment, it does help connect them with, again, things that we hope they'll care about. But then it also does aid with connecting to the land and where they are now and potentially where their family has come from. And then native plants also solve a lot of maintenance problems. So we talked about how bush honeysuckle was initially introduced to try to mitigate erosion along stream banks and in other natural areas. There are native plants that will do the same thing. I always like to say that phrase, like I mentioned in the beginning, there's a plant for every space, or right place, right plant. So if you have an issue or a goal where you want to accomplish something for your area, more than likely there's a native plant that has existed in this state and it is available at a native plant nursery for you to put in your yard to solve the issue you're having or to achieve the goal that you want to obtain. You would have to observe what kind of daylight or what kind of sunlight your yard gets, what your moisture condition is, what kind of soil do you have? Do you have really sandy soil, or do you have really high nutrient dense, loamy soil? You would have to make sure that you identify your space so that way you can identify what plants are going to thrive in that area and then solve some of your maintenance problems for you down the road. And again, help save some money. So here's some resources. After a quick search at mcpl.org, I looked up just a few of these books that I know that they have in their collection. This is the book by Doug Tallamy that I was talking about, Bringing Nature Home, How You Can Sustain Wildlife with Native Plants. If you're interested more in the ethnobotany aspect of it, these two books here in the middle, Under Prairie Skies and Plants Have So Much to Give Us, All We Have to Do all we have to do is ask, are highly recommended in a lot of plant book communities. And then if you have students or if you have children who are interested about how do we make connections with the plants if they don't necessarily talk to us. Again, this helps you understand and relate it on a level that a child can understand, which also is good for adults because sometimes we need those modes of communication that help us understand things through the eyes of a child as well. So, Beth, we can, I can make a note of this, or I can send this to you at the end of the presentation. We can send it out. But I'm going to leave this. I'm going to go ahead and move away from this slide. But if anybody has any questions about these books or titles later, I can always come back to that.
Yeah, if you send me the list of titles and authors, I'll add it to the email.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, so this is already in the email for the follow-up of this program. So for general native plant information, of course, I would recommend the Missouri Department of Conservation website. We have made a huge effort to really focus on what native plants can we offer our Missouri citizens as an option for their yard. So always check us out, mdc.mo.gov. Another option is grownative.org. They have a lot of educational resources, as well as Missouri Prairie Foundation, which is moprairie.org. And again, I'm going to keep moving through these slides, but this is going to be sent in a follow-up email. So if you haven't written it down, don't worry, you will get a chance to look at these later. If you're feeling very motivated to get some fall planting done here within the next month or so, and you're wanting to buy some native plants, mowildflowers.net is where I order all of my wildflowers from. They are based out of Jeff City, but they have an amazing nursery for native plants. And if you go to their website, they have the ability to bring some plants to the Kansas City area for some plant sales that are going on over the next couple of weeks. Or if you're in the Jeff City area, you can always stop by and pick up your plants in person. Now, if you live in Kansas City, sowildnatives.com is a plant nursery here in town. They have very limited hours, so you would have to double check when you could go and see their nursery and their plant collection, but they're always willing to help you out if you're wanting to buy native plants locally in Kansas City. And then again, if you are getting ready to plant some fall species, check out Missouri Wildflowers and Missouri Prairie Foundation to see when they have some plant sales coming up. These two websites will help you get to plant sales that are occurring statewide, not just Kansas City. So you might find something that's a little more closer to you if you are not in the Kansas City area. And then lastly, my email is always open for questions about plants. If I can't figure it out, I will always get you to the person that can answer your question. So feel free to jot down my email. And again, Beth, you can share that in the follow-up email to all of our participants here tonight. I'm more than happy to answer questions, give further information, or connect you with somebody who may be able to answer your question a little bit better than me. All right. So that's the end of that presentation. Okay.
All right. And just a reminder that the link to the survey is in the chat. If you have questions, we'll take questions at this time. Go ahead and type them in the chat. While we're waiting for people to type, thank you everybody for coming this evening, and thank you Jada for a very informative presentation. Lots of great resources.
You are welcome.
Okay, somebody asked soil prep for wildflower planting.
So, you can go a couple different routes with this. First off is you want to get rid of whatever is there currently. And there's a couple different ways that you can do that, depending on where you are and what you're comfortable with. Herbicide is an option. Like I said, that is up to the landowner. You don't have to use herbicide. If you do, follow the instructions, use it as it is recommended. Don't over apply. Don't use it in a situation where it could run off into the storm drains. If you want to go a non-chemical route, you can do something called solarization, which is where you will lay down sheets of clear plastic and stake it down and leave it on that soil for an extended period of time. That typically will kill off any of the vegetation as well as any seeds that are lying dormant in the soil. So that way, when you get ready to lay your native plants down, you shouldn't have to fight the weeds too much. Typically, if you are wanting to do plants like you would see in more of like a prairie situation or a grassland, typically those plants don't do super great if you put a thick layer of mulch around them, because they aren't used to mulch or woody vegetation being in their space naturally. So you can do mulch. I wouldn't rely on it solely though. So that would be where I would start with soil prep. Native plants don't need a lot of fertilizer, so don't worry about putting a ton of compost on your plants to prep your soil. You can till it up a little bit, but again, a lot of these plants are used to potentially really rocky soils that can be kind of clumpy or, not what we would consider super high quality. So as long as you can clear out most of the existing vegetation, that would be the best place to start.
Okay, somebody asked, what's a good low growing bush that I could plant in front of my house? I pulled out all the invasive burning bush.
Oh, excellent. Okay, so I had another presentation that I have done for another library. It was called Plant This, Not That. And I talked about burning bush as one of the invasives that escapes cultivation. It causes a lot of problems. My recommendation would be a plant called Wahoo, Wahoo. Fun to say, fun to plant. It's actually in the burning bush genus. So it's unanimous is the genus, and I can actually type that into the chat. So I would recommend Wahoo would be a good one. It gets about 12 feet tall. It can spread up to probably about 1.5 feet or so, and it can take a lot. It can take a lot of shade, which is always really nice. So Wahoo is good. Witch hazel is another shrub or small tree that is an option for you, or a small tree called a nanny berry. So I can type those into the chat for you. Wahoo, nanny berry, viburnum, or a witch hazel to replace burning bush. All right.
Then we have, if you have an established pollinator planting area, is it practical to just throw out seeds of other plants such as milkweed, blazing star, and let them naturally sprout?
You absolutely can. Are you going to get a huge germination rate? Possibly not. What I would recommend is if you have the seeds, I would try to get them to germinate in pots um, before you put them in your garden. So rather than just broadcasting the seeds, I would go ahead and do some winter sowing where you put you put the seeds in soil, usually in like a milk jug that you've cut almost all the way around. You open it up to where the bottom part can be filled with soil, sprinkle your seeds on top of that soil, and then put the part of the milk jug that you almost cut all the way off back on top, secure it with some duct tape, and then just leave that outside, somewhere where it's going to get sunshine and even snowed on. That's going to mimic the normal freeze thaw of a winter in the Midwest. When those plants start to sprout, thin them out, put them in little plots or little pots. And then what I would do is once those little plants, those little baby plants are established in their little grow pots, then I would go ahead and put them in your garden. You're going to have much more of a positive result if you do it that way. If you scatter the seeds, it's possible that they'll germinate, but they may germinate in a place that you don't want. And you may not see them because they're going to be covered up by some of your other growth from your established plants.
I'm going to skip back for a minute because someone asked, did you mean 12 feet or 12 inches on the Wahoo?
Let me double check that because I know. Thank you for catching that. 12 feet.
Okay, and then we have a question. There are a lot of aphids feeding on my different species of milkweed. Should I let the aphids feast or try and remove them?
So typically they're not going to cause harm. Aphids are sucking out the leaf juices from the plant. They're not actually chewing up the leaf material. And again, if they're native aphids, they're going to be working with that milkweed plant. The milkweed is expecting those aphids to be there, and they can sustain a colony of aphids on the milkweed. It looks overwhelming because they can get really thick and really concentrated. But I would not worry about it too much. The safest way that you can remove them is manually, by like scraping them off of your leaves. You can rinse the leaves with water. You can squish the aphids. However, you do have to be mindful that there might be some monarch eggs on your milkweed. So typically the best thing that you can do is just leave them be. Keep an eye on your plants. If it looks like your milkweed is really in distress, like leaves are dropping off of the plant, then you might need to do some manual removal. But anything that you do to the milkweed plant is probably also going to affect the monarchs. So just pay attention to that as you go about controlling the aphids.
And then we have another question about milkweed. I planted 4 milkweed plants last year, but lost 2 over the winter. The other 2 came up and reached about a foot tall, but then I lost those. I have them planted in a raised bed and only have zinnias planted with them. I did mulch the beds, so did that cause a problem?
It's hard to say. Sometimes milkweed can be very finicky. And if the soil, believe it or not, if the soil is too high of a quality, sometimes milkweed doesn't like it. So kind of goes back to what I said, like you don't need to add any like compost or fertilizer. And if the raised bed has a high concentration of potting soil or raised bed soil that is, highly nutritious, designed to yield healthy vegetable plants, it's possible that the milkweed didn't tolerate that soil level very well. I don't think it was the mulch. I've seen plenty of milkweed grow around mulch. I wouldn't worry about that. it's possible that those plants had something working against them from the beginning and they weren't meant to survive, or it's possible that the root system got damaged by some sort of external factor, such as maybe like rodents tunneling through, or the winter was harsh on them. It's hard to say.
And then any good natives for mainly shade?
Sure. For shaded areas, if you're looking for something low to the ground, sedges are going to be really good. We consider sedge. It looks like a grass, but it's slightly different. We consider sedge like a green mulch. Sedge would be really good if you want. If you are wanting flowering plants, if you want like some flowering plants, downy wood mint would be good. Downy skullcap would be another one that you could do. Mist flower does all right in shade. Wild hydrangea would be a small shrub that you could put in partial shade. And then I know we've also had luck with dwarf crested iris. So it's a very small iris plant that does okay in the shade. For plants that you're wanting to get specific, what am I trying to say? If you're wanting to get specific criteria for your yard, if you go to Missouri Botanical Garden, and they have something called a plant finder. I just put it into the chat box. If you go to that website, and then you can select the criteria that you're wanting to go for, rocky soil, shade, full sun, blooms in the spring, blooms in the fall, they will find a plant that you're looking for. That's a resource that I use a lot. So highly recommend that.
I will add that to the email.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. And then this is referring back to that first question about the soil. The person said that they're in South Central Missouri, Shannon County, rocky, dry with some clay, and that they've added garden soil, mulch, and peat.
Yeah. So, and like I put some compost in some of our beds as well, to help with like moisture retention, because there will be some native plants that do prefer a much more fertilized soil, or more just a different soil composition. So yeah, if you are trying to grow different plants that may not be found in your region, you may have to change the soil type a little bit. Take a look at where they're normally found in the state, what ecoregion they're usually found in, and then see if you can try to mimic that in your yard for your soil prep for better success. Does that answer the question, or was that a comment?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
And then we have, can we just scatter milkweed seeds outside and let them grow on their own? Would limey soil be suitable as it's a bit sandy and gritty? Will be cold in winter enough to germinate?
They will germinate. Now, when you scatter them, it's hard to find those seeds later. So that's why I like to put the plants as little babies in the ground so I can keep an eye on their growth. You absolutely can scatter milkweed seeds. They will germinate. The germination rate for milkweed seeds, if you crack open one of those milkweed pods and there's all that fluff and then you're left with all of the seeds, there's actually a very low percentage of those seeds that will germinate. So it may not yield the results that you're looking for. The temperatures, you're correct. It will get cold enough for it to germinate if you just scatter it on the top of the soil. And as far as the soil with the lime in it, they would probably do fine. Common milkweed can grow pretty much anywhere. if you've got a sandier soil that's a little more on the acidic side, you may not have as much luck with like the swamp milkweed. It prefers more of a marshy, saturated soil. But common milkweed might do okay. Same with whorled milkweed, WOHORLED, whorled milkweed. That's another one that can tolerate really dry, rocky, sandy conditions. So that's my recommendation for milkweed seeds. I've never had much luck just scattering them on the ground. I usually lose them by the time spring rolls around. So I like to start them in those little milk jug winter sowing containers so I can keep an eye on them throughout the growing season.
And then our final question for this evening, can we plant seeds this fall? If yes, when is it too late?
If you were going to plant some this fall, I would do plants this fall, and I would do seeds sometime in like January. Because if you plant seeds right now, we are still at the end of what is considered a growing season for all of our native plants. And it's possible that if you have seeds that have already gone through the stratification, where they've gone through that freeze thaw, their seed coat has broken down, it's possible they may grow now. But not have an established root system that would get them through winter. So I would put little baby plants from a nursery in the ground within the next 2 to 4 weeks. And for seeds, if you have any seed collecting to do this fall, I would save those seeds in a dry envelope somewhere where they're not going to get chewed up by insects or other varmints. And then I would put them out in your garden in January. So that way, if we get any snowfall and we hit those freezing cold temperatures, it's really going to help prepare them for a successful germination come springtime.
Excellent. Well, thank you everybody for coming, and thank you, Jada. We have a lot of thank yous and virtual applause in the chat. I will send out that email with the resources and again the link to the recording once that is available. And everybody have a great evening.
All right. Thank you.